Guys, welcome to the new episode of the First Responder Playbook. It's my pleasure to have Derrick Van Mell on with me today. Derrick is the founder and principal of the Center for Management Terms and Practices, the standards body for general management. His personal mission is to build a world community of caring leaders who live by the highest standards of ethics and competence. Everyone deserves a boss that makes them feel safe, appreciated, and proud. Derrick, thank you for joining me tonight.
Well, thanks, Brent. Glad to be with you.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you here. Kind of like we were talking about off air a little bit is in law enforcement, that I can speak to directly, but first responders in general, there's need for more standardized set of leaders, leadership training, but just leaders in general that care and, can show some empathy to their people they're leading. And so I'm excited to have you tonight.
Well, I hope I can help.
So let me ask you to start off, how did you go down the leadership journey?
Well, I started really as a generalist management consultant, and I had worked on big facility projects and their planning. So if you've been through it, even in law enforcement, you still have decisions about where should our facilities be, where should the district offices be, right? Think through the locations and then the design and layout, and then of course, how do you justify it financially? And so I started that, and then I realized there was a lot of my clients who are in all sectors, really didn't have a long range plan. In the management world, we talk a lot about strategic planning, and it's all the press about strategy, but it's only like we did a national study once. Less than 9% of organizations have a plan they follow, which is kind of crazy. And then out of that grew sort of an understanding that in the field of management itself, how you help people work together and how you lead them, uh, there was no set of standards, as you were saying, no standards of competence, no standards of ethics. But everybody remembers their best boss. Everybody remembers their worst boss too. And we know how important that is, not just for ourselves personally and how we feel, but for performance, how we perform and our team performs. And as first responders, well, that really matters, right? That's I don't have any first responder experience, but I have a wife and daughter who are nurses, so they're first responders in a way, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, even though and my wife was a respiratory nurse, so a COVID nurse, and well, she saw some things, right?
Yep.
And management, really matters how how you deliver things on scene, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I really want to talk about the difference between like managers and leaders and your take on that because in my opinion there's a big difference there. And we have that problem especially in the first responder world, and people will be given a title
Uh huh.
and they expect to be a leader from that point forward, and
Uh
you kind
huh.
of have to earn that leadership title.
Well, you do, and as I was getting prepared for our conversation, and doing some research about the roles of management in the first responder world, and the titles and the confusion between manager and leader is really common. But I don't know if this will be helpful, but I thought it might be helpful to think about management and leadership and those questions and make a distinction between management and leadership when you're on scene, when the stuff is happening, and then management and leadership, at the unit or squad level or department level or agency level. Those the principles are the same, but of course the pace and style are different. So it might be helpful as we go forward just to think about on scene versus behind the scenes, if you will. So
Okay.
if that's useful, but your question about the difference between manager and leader is they're not different people. So a manager is someone who helps people work together. Again, you can picture that when you're on scene, stuff's happening, right? And you're going by instinct and training. Um, and you're helping people work together. You're coordinating like in the moment. Um, and that's also true though, when you're behind the scenes, when time is not critical, uh, you're still helping people work together, different kinds of people. Now, so a manager is someone who helps people work together, right? You can picture that. All first responders can picture that on scene, certainly. And then a leader is someone who inspires people to take a risk. And here's the thing, they are not different people. Now, you can say a manager is someone who also has, among other skills and knowledge, leadership ability, right? They can set a challenge, they can inspire people, they can make success possible, but they're not different people. And there's so much confusion. We kind of, it's just sort of an ego thing to say you're a leader instead of a manager. Somehow that's more important, but it really doesn't make any sense. You're just maybe a manager without strong leadership ability. I mean, you could also say you're a leader without strong management ability. Um, there was a Secretary of State, James Baker, years ago said, a leader is someone who knows what to do and then does it. Sort of captures that two sides of the same person. So it's really important, I think, not to break through that confusion. And then, as I was researching, the first responder world and titles, I was not surprised because I see this everywhere. There's what I call title soup. I sort of printed out made some notes, right? Everything, you have coordinators, you have officers, you got planning managers, of course, you got the battalion leaders, on and on. So you got the titles of leader, director, coordinator, planner. Well, they're all managers with leadership responsibilities too. So the titles can be really confusing, and that's bad because, man, you really need to be clear of what it means to be a manager when you accept that job, and you really need to be clear about what your leadership responsibilities are. Again, in these two very different modes that, and there are lots of people, I'm certain, in the first responder world that are both on scene and have those responsibilities. They're the unit leader, but they also have, maybe leadership responsibilities and management responsibilities sort of between incidents. And then they're sort of taking the longer view and broader view. So, you have to really be clear what those roles are. So I don't know if that's clarifying. Maybe it's disappointing. Some people think of themselves as a manager or a leader, but you got to be able to make stuff happen, and wear the manager hat too.
No, I actually really enjoyed that distinction because that really helped clear some things up and maybe some misconceptions even I had. So I always tell people that this is not a podcast of me knowing everything. I'm learning just as much as everybody else listening. And so I really enjoyed that distinction there.
Good.
Um, what are some things, because we come from a very paramilitaristic mindset for the most time.
Hmm.
What are some ways that we can work on, leadership to like improve that like middle management level of like, because the problem we run into a lot is you'll have your administration that's, a lot of times in a separate building or there at
Hmm.
separate times from you. And then you have your middle management that's there usually the same time you are, and stuff gets lost in translation, be it because of times or just being in different buildings. What are some ways that you can work on improving that communication and
Yeah.
trust?
Well, the only way to motivate people is to give them meaningful work. And when you're on the front lines, right, uh, pretty clear that your work is meaningful. You're saving lives, protecting property, whether you're a police officer, firefighter, ER nurse, right, FEMA coordinator. Uh, so the best way to get through that, make that clear, is right to see how everybody connects to the good that you do in the world. And when you're in the management role and a good manager sometimes sort of stays in the background. They're letting the people in the front sort of get the credit, be accountable and get recognition. So you start to get disconnected. And like you say, they're often in different buildings, and that's a problem. So an analogy, maybe your listeners would find this useful, is because I've done a lot of work in healthcare. So let's just say you picture you're in the operating room and you're the surgeon. Just picture that for a moment. We've all seen it. Either first responders have seen that in real life, or if not, you've seen it in the movies. And the surgeon looks real simple. The surgeon puts his or her hand out and says scalpel, right? And the operating nurse slaps scalpel in the surgeon's hand, and it's the right scalpel, and they're handing it to them in the right way, and it's always there just when you need it. And then that happens, hundreds of times in an operation. Well, let's just think for a minute. What does it take to make that simple transaction work? Scalpel, and there it is, right there. Well, you've got to hire the right nurses. That's an administrator. You got to train them. You have to have enough of them so you can cover odd shifts, right? You need the logistics people who are ordering the scalpels and literally thousands of other things. And that's stockpiled. Generally, it's affordable and it's positioned exactly right in the OR. Of course, then you have the people who are cleaning up, central sterile, linen, bandages, supplies. Of course, if you're in the bus on the way to a car accident, you're thinking about, you're taking your emergency room with you, right? Same kind of thing. And then to make all that happen, the hiring, the equipment, information systems, you got the facilities people, you've got all these hundreds and hundreds of people just to make that one transaction happen right when it's supposed to happen. And so one thing I suggest to people when you feel like you're disconnected is, because as soon as you get disconnected, then you get us versus them, you get tension and conflict, and you lose sight of, we're all in it to save the patient, right? Or to, help the victim. So map that out. Literally, I would just draw it on a big piece of paper. Here's how all this stuff that people on scene do to make sure that, when they reach for the gauze, they reach for the scissors, they need the gas. It's all right there. You have to take a minute and appreciate what it took, to make that happen, both in terms of supplies and personnel. So that sometimes helps people once they're connected, and they're connected to purpose, right? Helping the victims. Now you're on the same team again, and that'll help people, communicate and appreciate the roles of so-called support. But it happens in hospitals, and a lot of surgeons are accused of being sort of prima donnas because they're the ones, everybody can see they're making stuff happen. And you need, that role needs a certain attitude. Yeah, I get that. But you need to remember that role does not function at all, or certainly doesn't function well without, 1,000 other people, making that happen. So,
I think you make a key point there, and it's really something that ties in well with first responders is that your title doesn't necessarily dictate how you treat people.
right.
And, a lot of times you'll see in the first responder world supervisors that kind of forget where they come from, as we all say, on the lower rungs,
Hmm.
because they'll get into a supervisor's position and they'll be like, well, I'm a corporal or I'm a sergeant now. I don't got to take calls or I don't have to, be out in the field as much. And it really rubs a lot of the rank and file people the wrong way because, well, when you were a patrolman, you wanted your supervisor to show up and say, hey, is everything okay? Or, hey,
Hmm.
do you need anything? And kind of like you said, like, you want to always be able to depend on, the right hand knowing what the left hand's doing. And a lot of times, especially in the first responder world, we need to really work on that communication and not forgetting, like, hey, when you were in that position as the patrolman,
Uh-huh.
like, how did you want your supervisor to treat you? And I think that's where we have a lot of disconnect right now.
Yeah. Well, you touched on maybe I think the most important point, and that is, the drug of power, right? And we all like to think that we're immune from that, right? Just like any addict. Uh, but it's a drug and it's addicting. And even, the folks who've been on the front lines, right? Um, who said, they were never going to be that person, who pushed people around, condescended, didn't use their power correctly. Um, we see them transforming. And, you can fault them, but you also have to realize, just how addictive that power is. And when you add power with pressure, um, and particularly in the first responder environment, when, the, the person in the emergency center, right in the war room or the battalion center, um, is having to call some difficult shots remotely because that happens, right? Particularly in a really bad incident where you have multiple units on call. Um, they're on the spot, and that so you use that power. You have to use it, and then you get addicted to it. So, but the way to deal with that is to talk about it. And that's why one of the three of the standards of management that comes first in our list is what we call the Pledge of Managerial Power. And it just recognizes, how much power even someone who's managing just a couple people has over, their staff. Like the story I often tell, I started off, I had a degree in economics, which was, well, pretty much useless. So my first job was I was basically a file clerk in a large real estate project, folding drawings, right? A little different than what I had planned for my life. But anyway, so one day after like a year, I'm in the file room, I'm folding drawings. HR director shows up in the doorway and says, "Hey, Derrick, here's your new assistant." There's some tall, skinny kid next to her. I'm sure you guys will get along. See ya. That was all the warning and training I got to be a manager. And that was a long time ago. But I reflect, like, did I make that kid's life a living hell? I mean, I think I'm a nice guy. I don't think I would use my power badly, but did I? You know,
Right.
yeah, I don't know. So and when people use power, there's a couple things to think about, right? One is, just be aware of it. And most people aren't. You need to talk about it. And the pledge, which is all, by the way, it's free. We're the standards body. So all this is free at our website, theindex.net. And it's just one page. And, the pledge itself is a single page. It says, you need to be aware of it. You need to introspect and think about it. You need to deal with people appropriately and as individuals, and you need to set an intention, every day. How am I going to use my power, to be helpful? There's a category of people who get addicted to power and they become, genuinely abusive. And that's those are people who just need to go. But there's still a distinction between people who they misuse their power. Sometimes they, overstep, they condescend, they micromanage, second guess, and they have the authority to do that, which is annoying, at least, right? But there's also, maybe you've seen this too, even in law enforcement. You got some bosses who don't use their power enough, right? They don't decide enough. They don't get rid of the bad apples. They don't fight for the resources that you really do need. So how you use your power is it has to be a conversation. And I found that most ethical shortcomings or shortfalls don't happen because someone's bad. I mean, I have seen that. Like, well, you're in law enforcement, I need to tell you.
Yeah.
But often people make ethical mistakes just simply because they're not aware of the situation that they're in and their influence there. Um, so one way to deal with that is if you can get certainly someone with a lot of authority, broader authority, to recognize, yeah, this is an issue. We don't want to have happen what you're describing is someone comes up from the front lines, promises they're never going to be that guy. They get promoted, then they do become that guy. And then people get upset, they underperform, they quit.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, especially because once you kind of lose faith in that leadership, it's hard to get it back.
Yeah.
And, that's a problem we're running into everywhere across America right now with first responders is they're losing people left and right.
Yeah.
If we can do a little bit better to at least make the leadership better on top of it and the management, that can at least save one or two officers or firefighters or paramedics, whatever it may be. Um, then let's do it because
Yeah.
we can't afford to lose any more people. I think every agency I know is, shorthanded and running from call to call, and so I'm with you. I love that. But you mentioned it, and I want to talk about it because I've been checking it out and I really enjoy it. Let's talk about the index.
Okay.
Um, h- how did it come into about, and kind of tell my listeners what it is.
Okay. So the index is a sort of all-purpose management utility. Again, you can get it for free from theindex.net. You subscribe, but there's no cost. And it puts on one screen basically, all of the management disciplines. It's sort of a 4-level tree diagram, all fits on a screen, work on a smartphone too. In the top level are things that, in the first responder world, you'd call it the administrative things, right? You'd outreach, hiring or HR, information systems, finance, and operations. and then you click on one of those terms, and then it breaks that down to 6 more, and then 6 more. And for each of those terms, there's a clear definition, and then some discussion questions, and also some, best practice resources. So one of the tricks in management is that it's always uncertain. You never are 100% done. So the index is a tool to bring all that into focus and to create a global standard. What do the basic terms of management mean? And I've worked with people, in most parts of the world, and try to get 6 people to agree what is marketing. Um, and then you also get to people in certain sectors. It's true in healthcare and maybe in your world. Oh, you don't say, oh, we don't do marketing. Well, yeah, you do. You're doing, you're telling the community about your programs, right? You're getting people to come to events. You're sharing information about your stats and performance. You're getting people to be engaged in what you do, right? So marketing applies. So the index is a tool to get people really clear on, all the things that a manager needs to know, sort of the best practices. And the principles are the same, in every sector. So that's what it is. And it just came about from, a lot of years in management consulting and planning. Like I was saying, I was discovering a lot of people, even with MBAs, didn't agree on what the basic terms were, or how they related one to another, or what the CFO does, or the finance director, and how can you work together if you're really not not understanding the basic terms, right?
Right, for sure. I really enjoy because it happens a lot in law enforcement. Uh, everybody works different shifts. Some works day shifts, some work afternoons, some work overnights,
Hmm.
some don't work weekends. And it never fails as a supervisor, they want to do a supervisor's meeting when, it's your time. You're supposed to either be off or sleeping or
Uh-huh.
um so you've already got a group of, 10, 15 different personalities. Then some of them don't have any sleep. I really like. I want you to talk about the 1/4 page meeting planner,
Sure.
because that is something that goes on far too often in law enforcement. Is the meeting drags on forever because there's no structure.
Right.
I really like this. Talk about that for a little bit.
Sure. Well, you know, um, uh, the quarter page meeting planner is literally it's a PDF you can download, again, for free at the toolkit on our website. And it just guides you through, what is the purpose of this meeting? Who's going to participate? What are the questions we're going to discuss? And posing the agenda as questions is really powerful. And believe me, law enforcement is not unique in being sick to death of meetings that go too long. That is a universal disease. And if you can get a reputation for running a tight meeting and short meetings, you will be a hero forever, right? So I'll just throw that out.
Yeah.
And you don't have to be necessarily the leader of the meeting. You can just sort of, take charge. So yeah, the quarter page meeting planner is really just prompts to basic best practices in meeting management. And that is, again, what are we here to do? There's a couple basic types of meetings, and this is all spelled out. There's a 1-page instruction sheet. Are we here to share information? We're here to make a decision, right? Those are basically the 2 kinds of meetings. Okay, and then so what exactly is it? And there's a place for a general catch up. Okay, let's just go around the table. Who's doing what? There's a place for that, but have a timer running. You know, and
Yes.
cut people off. And so it prompts you to be just really clear in a short amount of space, which forces you to be clear. What are we trying to do in this meeting, right? And then what are the main issues? Who needs to participate? And what's the decision, or what's the outcome? And how are we going to follow up to that? And I had a client who had an old-fashioned hourglass, and he had a meeting, and he had meetings. It ran for 60 minutes, and he just turned that thing upside down, bam, on the table when the meeting started. And when the last grain of sand went through there, he got up and left. That's it. And I encourage everybody to have that same rule. No, I'm done, and and don't go over. Just don't. And after a couple times, people just walking out when the official time is over. Yeah, then people get better at it. But those meetings are precious. It's precious time, and it's the manager's job to use that time well. It's a really valuable resource, particularly in shift work. I mean, again, my wife and daughter are nurses. They have to deal with that too. They have to come in at odd hours to be in the team meeting. So I know that one, um, and that's even more precious time. That's family time, right?
Yes.
So make them. You can actually have meetings that are focused, informed, collaborative, creative, and decisive, because it can happen. But you have to. You're just going to have to be tough. And if you're not the leader of the meeting, well, barge in a little bit. That's my advice.
Yeah, I love that. And there's so many different, as I explore the index, there's so many different tools on here. There's some strategic planning tools. There's risk assessments. There's audits, budget-based stuff, questions, project planners. Guys, please check the index out because the nerdy side of me loves that. And there's so many administrative level people can just use those, and it's all free on his website, guys. So check it out. Please subscribe. But Derek, I want to kind of touch on as we start to wrap up a little bit. Um, how did you decide I'm going to write a book? And tell me the process. You've wrote 3 books.
Yeah. Well, my first book was about architecture. My focus in that time of my life was like the facility planning work, and I'm just the kind of guy who sees sort of you know complex systems that aren't clear, and I just like to try to bring some system and clarity to it. But the book about management and in the management roles is called Atoms and Orchestras. Um, First of all, after writing 2 books, you learn how to be a little more efficient. You learn how to write for your audience. It's more of a workbook than the other ones. Um, but uh, what I realized is that there's only a certain percentage of people who make good managers. I don't know if that's 1 in 20, 1 in 15. They have to have that interpersonal drive to serve that you've talked about. Good news is that when you're in the first responder world, again, broaden that to healthcare and and other worlds. People are generally there to serve, and they are capable, if they're reminded of it, to put other people first. But for people who are serious students of management and they understand how much is at stake, right? It's not just right. The people who work for you are are they depend on you as leader to make their lives give their lives meaning. They'll make them look forward to coming to work every day. That's incredibly important, right? That is incredibly important. And I wanted to write a book that not only would inspire people, to take up management as a calling, or decide objectively that they don't want to do it. That's good too, because nothing's worse than having someone be a manager who doesn't want to be a manager. That's bad all the way around. And then I just
Yes.
wanted to just solve these really basic problems and provide these standards, standard terminology, which is the index, standard of ethics, the pledge of managerial power. And then the third standard is sort of the standard of competence. What does a manager need to know? Which is called the Milwaukee model. What do I need to know about personal development, supervision, planning, the broader organizational things. And it's a really interesting time to be thinking about this because of AI and what does that mean for how we work and how we manage. Uh, but as you're saying, in the first responder world, if there were lots more great managers and leaders, at every level, from the unit to the agency, um, there would be more people applying, for those roles, because there would be guys like you going out in the world saying, I love my job. I love the people I work for. They're really great. That would bring more people into the system. That's true in every industry now. So I really wanted to inspire that. And actually, I'm now just started my 4th book, which is really just sort of get at this very basic issue. Why should someone be a manager? I mean, these questions that you're asking me and in some of these podcasts made me realize, holy smokes, there's a need to make the pitch, to that person, why you should consider it as a career.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something we run into a lot with first responders, especially. And I love my dad to death, but I'll use him as an example. He was a state trooper for 24 years, and he never wanted to promote to a leadership position because
Mhm.
he never wanted to be around those people. It was looked at as, I don't want to say a sellout, but he didn't want to go be around administration.
Yeah.
And looking back on it now, he's like, I wish I would have done that.
Well,
And we've got to figure out a way to make people realize that sometimes it's okay to come out of your comfort zone to be that leader or manager.
first of all, please tell your dad I appreciate 24 years of service. That's amazing, and he inspired his son, obviously. So
Yep.
that's a
Thank
really
you.
good thing. But uh, not everybody, not everybody wants to be a manager. They don't have the skill set. They have other skill sets that are really valuable. So that's fine. But and some people become managers because they do want to go in and maybe this would have been your dad on another day. I want to go get promoted, go into administration because I want to go set things right.
Yep.
And that's okay as long as you get the training to do that. And it's a classic mistake, happens everywhere. Oh, you're really good as a police officer, therefore I want you to be a manager. Well, it
Yep.
doesn't make any sense, right? There are 1,037 business schools in the world. They exist for a reason. So the training is so important. But I've tried to lay out a path that you can do that. But so one simple tip, if we're coming to the end here, I'd encourage everybody to do. If you have any inkling at all about wanting to, go into administration to become a, either a squad leader or go into administration, or maybe you've been asked to consider it. Um, just talk to people. It doesn't have to be in your world, and ask them. Tell me about your favorite boss. And of course, that's my work, so I've had that conversation hundreds of times, and get people talking about their favorite boss and why they were so great. You start hearing some of the same things, which is useful. They cared about me. They were fair. They were tough. They let me fail, but they didn't blame me. They taught me everything that I know. Um, you know, I make an analogy to school teacher. Now, I had an English teacher in high school, Greg Baker, and he was that kind of personality person who could put each student first. He really thought of them as individuals. Now, when he passed away, 500 former students came from all over the country to go to his memorial because he thought of them as individuals and helped them be all that they could be, not necessarily as writers and English majors, whatever field they went in. And a good boss can do that. I remember a conversation I had not long ago with a young woman. I asked her this question. She goes on and on, about her favorite boss, another woman. And I asked her, well, where is she now? Where is your boss now? Well, she's working for a Fortune 500 company overseeing, the HR function and management development function. So she's helping literally thousands of people, indirectly, but she's helping them all, you know, come to work, feel safe, appreciated, proud. I mean, that's a great thing to do. And so, maybe if people could bring that first responder mindset of service, I'm just going to throw myself into helping this person in front of me, even it may not be the victim, but it may be the frontline person. Um, they're going to find that instead of all that tension they feel as being stuck in the middle of some hierarchy, they're going to say, "Oh no, I'm connected to purpose. I'm making a difference in this person's life. That's huge." But yeah, just ask people, tell me about your favorite boss, and then, give yourself a half an hour for the answer because people will go on about it. And maybe that'll inspire people to, think about it. And I hope that my book and the tools, um, will be guidance to make people say, yeah, it doesn't have to be chaotic. It can be positive, constructive, and we can have great meetings that end on time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I,
Yeah.
I I love that. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. That's a great starting point of, find your boss that you knew, who's your favorite one, and that's a good starting point for pretty much anybody in any field. So I love that.
Good.
Um, so guys, theindex.net, you can contact Derek on there. There's tons of free tools that can help in your management leadership journey. Derek, where can they get your book at? Your books?
Well, the links are on the website under book, I think, and
Okay.
or Derrick Van Mell at Amazon, and it'll take you there. And if any of your listeners want to just chat with me and talk a little bit, learn a little bit more, or learn how to apply it, or talk through a situation, I'm happy to do that. I'm at this stage in my career where I'm just here to help people. It's, I don't get paid for every time I take a breath, so
Yep.
they should feel free to contact me.
And how can they contact you?
Yeah, all that's on the website, theindex.net.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Guys, Derrick, thank you for joining me tonight. You've been awesome. And everybody stay safe out there.
All right, Brent, thank you.